with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, September 29th, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Mike Hulme, professor of human geography at the University of Cambridge, author of Climate Change. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., Kyrsten Sinema slammed for her apparent desire to single-handedly sink the Biden presidency. And in the House progressives hold the line. They will deny votes for that bipartisan framework infrastructure deal that Kyrsten Sinema and Rob Portman put together. Meanwhile, Democrats to offer a clean, continuing resolution should keep the government open until December 3rd. The Treasury Secretary says the drop-dead debt limit day is October 18th. A massive British study shows that over a third of COVID cases have at least one symptom 6 months later. And in the U.S., vaccine mandates are reportedly having wide adherence. Speaking of reports, the U.S. reports that 23 species, 22 of whom are animals, which moved from the endangered species list to extinct, gone forever. Lastly, the National Labor Relations Board General Counsel asserts that college athletes are, in fact, employees. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. As my colleague, Emma Vigeland, likes to say, it is Hump Day. Happy Hump Day.
That it is.
There you go.
Happy Hump Day.
Hello, Emma.
Coin that one.
Yep. Yeah.
Hello, Sam.
It feels like that's catching on. So,
I think so too. I mean, we have to see if it's trending or not, but
right. Kudos on that. So it is Wednesday. There's a lot going on. We will be talking about this in the program, but I think as we speak, there are votes taking place on Capitol Hill, or about to be, to pass a clean continuing resolution that is essentially like we're just going to extend the budget that we had for last year into this year. It will extend until December 3rd. It is expected that this will have support from Republicans. They will allow this to happen. Nobody wants a government shutdown. However, it is unclear at this point how the debt limit will be raised. It appears as if really the only options that Democrats are going to have, and they keep trying to pass in the Senate, presumably to make it clear that Mitch McConnell is obstructing this. I have a thought on that in a moment. But my understanding is, and it feels like there's maybe 3 people in the entire country who have a sense of how this works. Because no matter who I talk to, they all have some varied response. But the debt ceiling could go into the infrastructure reconciliation bill. It theoretically would make it a must pass. However, I've heard some people that I've spoken to on the Hill say that they think that actually Manchin would vote against that because they know that there's an opportunity to do a separate reconciliation bill exclusively for the debt ceiling and raise it that way. That may happen, but it's going to happen relatively quick. We will see.
I mean, it seems like Schumer's opposed to that for some reason. Maybe it's because he feels like it's a waste, but this time is also a waste where you're trying to shame Mitch McConnell and hypocrisy shame him, which is impossible.
Well, and you know, and I think that's what he's doing. I think he's trying to make it seem like this is a very extreme thing that they're doing. It is conceivable that because, and we're going to talk about this in a moment, that the Progressive Caucus has basically said, we're not going to vote for the bipartisan framework on Thursday, tomorrow, unless we're going to have a reconciliation bill, which of course they're not going to have one. So they're going to need some type of ironclad promise. It's not inconceivable to me, though this is purely speculation on my part, that the promise, and I don't know how you get a promise, right, from a Kristen Sinema or Joe Manchin. The only way that one could ensure that they would vote for it is maybe if they did put the debt ceiling into that reconciliation bill. They somehow folded it in. I don't know, but we will have a better sense of this in the coming days, at least that aspect of it. But I think you're right, Emma, that first of all, there is no salience as to the debt ceiling question. It seems to me, I was listening to I listen to the radio news every morning just to get a sense of how stories are being reported, and on the AP minute that they do at the bottom of the hour, the top of the hour, they conflated the debt ceiling with the budget shutdown, with the government shutdown. And unless you were steeped in this stuff, you and I talk about this every day, there's no way you would know that these two things aren't related. And they aren't. They simply aren't related. One has to do with the operating budget. The other has to do with just paying our credit card bill, essentially. I should say our credit card bill to ourselves, largely. And so I just don't think this resonates with the American public in the way that it seems that the Democrats think it does. But let's move on to this clip, because it is very important for the progressives who are going to vote against the bipartisan framework tomorrow, if there's actually a vote, that it is clear that they are not blamed if this whole thing falls apart. There's simply no way the Progressive Caucus can vote for this bill after having had a deal that they would both be brought up at the same time. Kristen Sinema, or any lawmaker, just happens to be her in this instance, because many people think that Manchin seems to be okay, or they could negotiate with him, cannot be rewarded by having her bill pass in the process of sinking the reconciliation bill. So it's very important the way this is framed by progressives so that the news media picks it up. And this is a great example of Ro Khanna reframing things on CNN in a way that I think is really important to get this out there. Play this clip.
Congressman Ro Khanna is one of the progressive lawmakers the president is trying to win over. He joins us now live from Capitol Hill. Congressman Khanna, I'm getting word that Senator Kyrsten Sinema has made a third trip to the White House today to meet with the president and also his aides. She is sort of seen as on the other side of where you are on this. She's one of the moderate Democratic senators trying to work out a deal from the other side. Have you gotten any word about whether there might be any breakthroughs tonight?
John, the president has already won me over. I'm on his side, as, by the way, is 99% of the Democratic Party. We want to deliver on his message for the working and middle class. That means giving affordable child care to everyone watching. It means seniors are finally going to get dental and hearing aids covered. It means that if you're sick, you're going to get paid leave, and you don't have to go into debt to go to community college. And what we have said is that if there is an agreement that the president strikes on this Build Back Better agenda, we will vote for the bipartisan bill. We're willing to negotiate. We've said front load the benefits, don't have them as many years. All of the folks at the White House
Pause it
know
for
we're
one
being
second.
reasonable,
I just
and
wanna,
literally one senator.
This is an important thing to keep in mind. The numbers are going to go down. And we've talked about this before, that the numbers at the end of the day are not necessarily as relevant as what gets funded in what manner. Because there's also different ways in which they can play with the numbers as to what 3.5 actually constitutes.
And they're willing to do that, as Kana says right there. They're willing to be flexible with the salary cap for what it's worth.
Right. But it's actually, in this instance, the way that they'd manipulate the salary cap, and he suggested, and I think we may see this, this bill is for 10 years out. So we've heard it expressed as $350 billion over the course of 10 years. That's what gets you the $3.5 trillion. What they could also do is simply make it a 5-year bill. We're just going to fund this for 5 years. And therefore, you're cutting the cost of the bill in half. And you're basically challenging future Congresses, and which you are doing anyways with a 10-year. There's no real sense of whether 5 years out it's going to be a more favorable situation than 10 years at this point. You're challenging future Congresses to cut back on these programs that the American public has already started to adopt. And that rarely happens, particularly if they're successful, and there are things like, paid sick leave, paid subsidized childcare, or universal pre-K, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one of the things that I think we can anticipate happening, unless Kristen Sinema, here's Ro Khanna starts to express this sentiment that maybe there is no negotiation to be had.
That the president strikes on this Build Back Better agenda. We will vote for the bipartisan bill. We're willing to negotiate. We've said front load the benefits, don't have them at as many years. All of the folks at the White House know we're being reasonable, and literally one senator, Kirsten Sinema, is holding up the will of the entire Democratic Party.
What has she said that she wants, as far as you know?
That's the question. The president keeps begging her, tell us what you want, put a proposal forward. You see the progressives, look at what we've compromised on. We went from $6 trillion to $3.5 trillion. Then they said we need to pass a bill in the Senate first. We said, even if you come up with an agreement, that's fine. Then they said, go below $3.5 trillion. We said, okay, we're willing to negotiate, front load the benefits. Let's talk about the years. We are willing to compromise. How do you compromise, John, when Sinema is not saying anything? And what's mind-boggling is you have unanimity in the House. Tomorrow, the Speaker could get a deal in the House on a number. And I believe you have 48 senators. I believe Senator Manchin would come on board. It's important for people to realize this. This is not progressives versus moderates. This is the entire Democratic Party and Joe Biden versus Kristen Sinema.
And you have no idea what she wants?
I have no idea what she wants. I don't think her colleagues know what she wants. I don't think the president knows what she wants. I don't think House moderates knows what she wants. We've said, let's get in a room. Let's negotiate. Let's come up with a deal. And I just don't understand it. I mean, the president carried her state. Look, I respect Senator Manchin. He's in a state that is 30% Trump, and he always comes through at the end, and he's a person who votes his conviction. Kristen Sinema is in a state that Biden carried. Her colleague, Mark Kelly, who has higher popularity ratings, he's totally on board with the agenda. And Sinema is out there saying she doesn't want to raise even a dime of taxes on the wealthy, on multimillionaires. They're all in my district. I'm saying raise their taxes. But we don't know what she wants. It's really odd.
All right. So Pramila Jayapal, who's head of the Progressive Caucus in the House, has said that she will not.
That's the message there.
I mean, put that to music. That was exactly what needed to be said there.
And the thing is, it is really odd.
Yeah. There's something off about her personally.
Nobody can quite figure this out because, in many reporters and commentators have made the same point. She could easily go online and raise the kind of money that she's raising right now from corporate interests. But she's choosing to go with these corporate interests, right? She gets this money from Big Pharma. She changes her mind on the pharmaceutical negotiation aspect of this with Medicare. There's no doubt in my mind that if she was to announce if I hit a fundraising goal of X amount of dollars from people, I will vote for, negotiating prescription drugs.
And she could just do her girl boss thing, and she could have branded herself as like this funky out of the box, outside of the box, anti-Trump person who gave flowery speeches on the Senate floor. But this is the route she's chosen to go down, and she seems like I just was saying, Ted Cruz was had the record for being the most hated senator by members of his own party in Congress. And now I think Sinema's taken the cake, right? And
without a doubt.
People compared Cruz to Satan, and she's already, in her short time period, usurped him.
And this is the thing that is, I think, what has a lot of people baffled. She is going to, right now, Move On has activated their people in Arizona. The Arizona Democratic Party has said that we will give her a vote of no confidence. The groups that organized to first get her to fundraise for her when she was a congressperson are now organizing to primary her ultimately. And I think your assessment is right. Everything that I've read, all her colleagues now are getting very, very angry. She is not setting herself up for a corporate lobbyist job at this point, because you need to either have some measure of expertise to go to your colleagues with, like, oh, yes, she was always the one who knew as much as you could know about fracking, and so we're going to take her word for it. Or you have developed good relationships with your colleagues. She has not done that in this instance. She has no numbers. There's no negotiation. She's clearly trying to tank the bill. Maybe, Big Pharma said, we're going to save billions upon billions of dollars because of this sinking this infrastructure bill of Biden's. You're going to be taken care of for the rest of your stay. I mean, we know that call that Joe Manchin had with the no labels people saying, if you folks ever, are going to hire some of my friends in the Senate, this would be a good time to do it, and give them something. Something good in the future. So it's really fascinating. And this dynamic that's playing out. And we should say what's happening with the Congressional caucus. We'll talk more about this later in the program. But this is really important, the Progressive Caucus in the Congress. To make this stand is not only going to, and even if it sinks the $500 billion, essentially highway bill plus, that is the infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, it's going to have implications down the road in terms of the way that the Democratic Party makes their assessments when they start to make decisions as to whether they take progressive concerns more seriously down the road. But we will talk more about that later in the program. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Mike Hulme, professor of human geography at the University of Cambridge, author of Climate Change. We got one sponsor today, and I'll say this. I don't know if I've ever talked about this. I think I did, but when my ex-wife and I had our first child, we had what is known as a doula. And the doula is basically somebody, because she was having a natural childbirth, and so the doula is basically like an advisor. You're not quite clear exactly, like I didn't know exactly why we would need it, but we were terrified, first time having a kid. And it turned out there was a lot of complications in the pregnancy, in the actual delivery. The doula was very key in terms of telling me, what I could say to the midwife or the doctors and et cetera, et cetera. And today's sponsor, I don't know if he would agree with this assessment, but it appears that way to me, is mysolarnerd.com. And they sort of function like a doula who is a solar consultant, fan and longtime listener of the show, who has years of experience working in the solar industry. And they walk you through the entire process of retrofitting your house with solar panels. So if you're a homeowner, you may not have, you probably considered solar at one point, but you didn't know anywhere where to start. It is very confusing. There's a lot of homeowners who aren't aware that solar, what solar options are available. It's now possible to retrofit a home with solar panels for no money down. Most homeowners that switch over to solar, they see significant savings starting in their first year. This is possible thanks to a solar investor tax credit, which is going away soon. Point is, there's a lot of programs out there that can leave you high and dry when you start to lease stuff or you lease back or this and that. My Solar Nerd's mission is simple. They help you find the best solar program for your home, and they make the transition as easy and smooth as possible. And Danny came from an industry where he had seen a lot of predatory action, a lot of predatory behavior in this way. And he is dedicated to making sure that the people he consult with have no surprises and know exactly what they're getting into. And the way they do it, they analyze your usage, they find the best equipment for your needs, they determine the incentives and financing that you might qualify for, and then they project manage the whole process between you and the installers. They get permits, et cetera, et cetera. So don't wait. Some of those tax credits and incentives are sunsetting. The current 26% tax credit drops down to 22%. I think it's next year before going away. If a project is completed by the end of this year, December 31st, that homeowner qualifies for the 26% tax credit. So there's still time. Some markets, which you may live into, are prone to power outages, and you may qualify for off-grid backup solutions in that instance. And Majority Report listeners will get a $200 gift card upon installation of their solar system. So go to mysolarnerd.com, fill out the inquiry form now. Make sure you select Majority Report listener for how you heard about mysolarnerd.com. And that's the way you'll receive the $200 gift card upon installation. Appreciate his sponsorship today. And we will, of course, put that link in our YouTube description and our podcast description. Okay, I want to welcome to the program Mike Hulme, professor of human geography at the University of Cambridge, author of his most recent book is Climate Change. Mike, I'm here with Emma Vigeland. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, thank you.
So let's start, and we're 12 years out, I guess it was, from when you wrote Why We Disagree About Climate Change. Let's just talk about how up until that point, and maybe if it's changed over the course of the past 10 years, how the idea of climate change is constructed and presented to people. Before we get to maybe what's track that, I guess, for us from a historical standpoint.
Yeah, well, I wrote the previous book, Why We Disagree About Climate Change, just in the run-up to the big Copenhagen conference, the International Negotiation Conference. This book has been written in the run-up to the forthcoming conference in Glasgow. So, 12 years on, as you say, the run-up to Copenhagen was, again, a moment of great anticipation or hope that through international negotiations, there could be a global agreement that would decisively intervene. That turned out not to be the case for some of the reasons, in fact, that I pointed out in my book in 2009. 12 years on, things have changed in various ways. The climate has got warmer. There's more and more evidence of changes in extreme weather. And of course, in the meantime, we've had the Paris agreement that was negotiated 6 years ago, and that's changed somewhat about the political expectations of how nation states should contribute to arresting some of the challenges of climate change, not in the way that Copenhagen wanted, which was through a top-down mandated agreement. This is now much more voluntary bottom-up. But I think, for me, many of the same underlying reasons why we approach this challenge of climate change in very radically different ways, depending on who we are, where we live, what our histories are, what our politics are, what our cultural values are, those actually remain the same. And it means that climate change, as I have pointed out many times, in my view, is not a problem, a technical problem awaiting a solution, least of all a solution designed in a meeting of 197 governments in a negotiating session. That's just not the way in which climate change is going to be arrested. it's a different type of a problem. It's a different type of a challenge. And it requires us to understand these underlying reasons for our different views on the future and on the sort of society that we wish to find ourselves living in.
What is the nature of that different? Like, I mean, tease that out for us. And we should say, I mean, I think what drew my attention to your work was your in response to the IPCC. The first report that we get is from the natural scientists, and that is subsequent to that 6 months from, I guess, at the beginning of last month. We will see sort of more policy-oriented things and things that are more sort of like social science based in terms of a response. You're a social scientist, and so which I think is important for people to know in terms of like where what set of assumptions you have as you look at a problem. But I mean, tease that out for us. That dynamic of the natural sciences and the social sciences, and how, at the very least, it seems, and I think it remains, it has been the natural scientists who have been at the forefront of this. Was there a point where they should have receded, or should it always been? I mean, tease that out for us.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, I mean, just one thing to point out is that although I probably would trade under the social science banner at the moment, actually I entered this whole field way back in the 1980s as a physical natural scientist, interested in the underlying statistics of climate, how we could extract signals from those statistical data, how the observations of climate change around the world compared with climate science models. So for maybe the first 20 years, I would very much be a natural scientist. And that was my original contributions to the IPCC back in the 1990s and the early 2000s. But yes, I've moved the focus of my interest really away from the natural science, because it seems to me that the really difficult questions are those to do with the human world. That they're not to do with trying to tease out ever decreasing degrees of, or rather increasing degrees of precision about exactly how the climate is changing and how the climate might change in the future. That isn't really the name of the game any longer. It's really to understand the human and social dimensions of this. And so that's why I made this observation just recently, of course, that the IPCC, as it has always done, actually, right from the very beginning, if we go right the way back to the 1980s, the late 1980s, when the IPCC was crafted by the world's governments, that was very much when the physical science of the climate system was in its early stages. And it's understandable why an intergovernmental panel was put together with a very heavy presence of natural scientists. And so most of those early reports, the first 1, 2, or 3 reports, were very much dominated by that natural science. Is the climate changing? How much of it is attributable to human activities? What's the likely range of climate futures that we are likely to have to grapple with? Those were the questions back at the end of the last century. Those aren't the questions any longer. And it seems to me the IPCC hasn't really moved in its structure or its orientation or its communication strategy. It still leads with climate science, as though this still is a scientific problem that can be resolved. If we only get the predictions more accurate, if only they can become more precise, if only we know exactly what proportion of climate change is natural, what proportion is human caused, if only we can attribute this particular weather event with a certain degree of probability to human causes, then somehow our policymaking becomes easier. That's not the way, really, I don't think politics or the human, the social world operates. And so that's why I say, really, a more radical way for the IPCC to go would be to put the policy evaluations, the policy assessments, the policy tools, the policy levers, put those out there first, and then the climate science can come along, and fill in 1 or 2 of the corners of the picture, but it's not really about climate science.
I mean, it's interesting because, as somebody who, I've been doing some form of this for 15 years, 16 16 years now, and it's very hard to talk about climate because it really is like the story of it is it's going to happen, and we have a couple less years before we're going to be it's not going to be reversible than it was a couple years ago, and instead of being 94% sure, we're now 96% sure. This doesn't so with that said, and I think that
so you've been doing this for 16 years. I guarantee you, if you're still doing this job in 16 years time from now, we'll still be talking about this stuff. Climate change is not going to go away.
Indeed. I mean, but the challenges are going to be more, I guess, the things that we're going to be talking about are going to be increasingly more practical, or I should say tangible and evident, right? I mean, things are going to become, and we're starting to see that. I mean, on some level, we're starting to see that in this country with the flooding and with the wildfires and with the droughts and with the intense heat. The Biden administration, just I noticed the other day, OSHA came out with new standards for working in intense heat because that's going to be happening more. But to get back to that sort of like the broader question of how you address these things, is that something that can be done universally? I mean, I can understand like the impetus to announce like it's 98% more sure now because that applies to the world. Whereas the policy prescriptions or the implications are different depending on the region, maybe depending on the culture, depending on the nation. So is there an ability, what would constitute sort of those broad principles that you could put out, that you could put the second report first, both as like temporally, but also in terms of emphasis?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. I think actually there are two questions in there, really. One, first is what can we expect from a global assessment of experts, whether they're scientists or economists or policy people or social scientists, whoever? What type of assessment that operates by mode of consensus, and that is how the IPCC operates? What can we expect from that type of assessment? And in a sense, you could argue that it's easier to expect that natural scientists and natural science moves towards a converging consensual position on how the physics of the atmosphere and the oceans interact, and et cetera, than it is to reach a converging consensus around, for example, the effectiveness of a climate tax or the pace of innovation in particular forms of renewable energy technologies, or the ways in which those technologies, new renewable technologies, may intersect with particular religious values in different world nations, where exactly these points about human difference come to the foreground. So what actually are we expecting from these global assessments? And I actually made the point way back in the late 2000s, before Copenhagen, that perhaps the IPCC really should just rethink its structure. Yes, producing global assessments of natural science is fine, but really what different nations and governments and policy communities need are more regionally or culturally attuned evaluations of how particular policy levers or policy structures operate on a regional scale. And there, a global assessment may actually not be very helpful at all. So yes, it's about inverting the order. We need to look across our policy portfolio before we get overexcited about new developments in science. But I think we also need to have and I would argue for a nested approach to thinking about policy evaluation, so that one has some assessments that can transcend particular national or regional values, but also you have then a sub-tier of evaluations that are much more tuned to the particular historical, cultural, and development circumstances of individual nations. And it's not one size fits all. There will be very, very different policy tools and policy portfolios that would be suitable for China compared to what might be relevant for some of the Central American republics, let's say.
So if I understand you correctly, in that concept of nested, it would be develop maybe, five silos of things to look at. What do we replace carbon with? What are our mitigation strategies? What does it mean for
how should land? How should land be used?
Food, and maybe more than five. I just come up with five, and then you almost have a subset that maybe these answers can apply to these regions, some of those silos, and others maybe to cultures or economies that are similar in terms of what they're,
according to historical development pathways they're on, according to the vested interests of incumbent powers, according to the different political cultures, what works for a command and control economy is not going to be suitable for a liberal democracy that operates through a more market-based or laissez-faire type economic structures. So these are the differences that mean that one size fits all certainly won't work, won't do the job, and pretending otherwise, keeping hold of some universal aspiration for a breakthrough solution in Glasgow or Copenhagen or Paris or anywhere else is actually going down the wrong path. It's actually holding out a false hope that the world is one and can move together as one. There was a few years ago, there was a paper published by some UK social scientists calling, and they actually came out of the defense, they were sort of defense strategists. And they called actually for the world to agree on a single strategic narrative for a future pathway to deal with climate change. And to me, that's exactly the last thing that we want. You're never going to get a single strategic narrative about the nature of the problem and the nature of the solution on something like climate change. That might be fine if you're if you're a defense advisor for a national government, but here we're dealing with 197 different nations on a problem that is deeply, deeply complex with conflicting values and conflicting goals. One strategic narrative is never going to do the job.
Well, doesn't it also, I guess, obscure the power relationships as well? I mean, I heard maybe yesterday that the continent of Africa produces something like 3% of global emissions, and yet they're going to bear the brunt of a lot of these climate catastrophes as well. So the thing that would stick out to me in terms of a significant concern would be a one-size-fits-all approach that, doubly harms poorer nations, for example.
Absolutely. I mean, Africa is a good case in point here, where take one particular strategic policy initiative, which is divestment from oil, coal, and gas, particularly. Divesting certainly from future investments in new installed capacity. Now, that might make an awful lot of sense in some of the Western European nations. It might be something, and actually there's some movement in terms of China on this, but removing all investment in new, let's say, natural gas infrastructure for Africa, where its per capita emissions are fully 20 or 30 times proportionally smaller than they are in Western Europe or North America, and where their energy consumption is still a tenfold order of magnitude smaller, where there are huge unmet development needs, where cheap and reliable electricity is needed. Applying that blanket divestment strategy in Africa not only seems ineffective, given how small the emissions are in any way in Africa, but also seems to cut across some natural justice here, where you've got over 1 billion Africans now, many of whom are living below what most Westerners would deem as a poverty line in terms of energy consumption and provision. So they're exactly the case, where a single strategy of divesting unilaterally, universally across the whole world from new oil and gas infrastructure would seem to me inappropriate, even if it might be appropriate in other world regions.
So I want to just, shift slightly to the question of why we disagree about, in this country, I think I don't know, you tell me, you would have a better sense of this, in the United States anyways, that we are unique in the polarization around even the existence of climate change, or at least, what you could attribute it to at this point. Every couple of years, there's like sort of these concessions. Well, it's happening, but it's, it's God's plan. It's not, and I think the United States is fairly unique, at least in terms of degree of polarization on that question. If, as a world, and I think it makes, I think it's pretty easy to see why, at least, we might have different interpretations of how we should respond to it based upon, all the factors you've just been talking about. Why is it that we have this level of polarization about climate change? And can you compare and contrast it to the extent that there is disagreement about the idea of climate change? Obviously, how to respond to it is a function of a lot of different factors you talk about in terms of the politics. But the mere existence of the problem, can you compare and contrast like where the United States sits, maybe in the UK sits relative to the rest of the world, and why we are so uniquely, polarized about this? Because I think you're of the opinion that it's not merely the oil and gas interests here, although I'm sure that contributes some. But
yeah, so that's interesting. This question of polarization. I mean, yes, the US is pretty much out there at one end of the spectrum. I mean, you do certainly find in other countries, certainly in Europe, residual subgroups of populations who are more resistant to the idea, that climate is inherently unstable, but in particular that human activities are substantial enough to be able to shift it out of particular patterns. In the States, that polarization has been strongest. On the other hand, we shouldn't overplay this. At least my reading of the social science and the polling literature in the States is that there's never been a decisive minority that challenge the basic principle that human activities are substantial enough to alter the climate. It's varied, between 20% and 40%, and probably it's more on the 20% side in the last year or two. It's a significant minority, but it's not a decisive minority who would hold that position. But I think you asked about.
I mean, it was though, like 10 years.
Well,
out.
It was. If you go back, if you go back 10, 15, 20 years, it was a bigger proportion. And I think if you look at the causes, yes, undoubtedly, there are, there's been mischief caused by incumbent fossil fuel interests in the United States, but the United States isn't unique in that regard. I mean, many other countries have got powerful fossil interests that would seek to defend their industrial position. But not, undoubtedly in the past that has been important in America. But that to me doesn't explain the whole story. And I think one also has to look at questions about religious values and religious narratives, the sort of cosmologies, if you will, that people hold about how, how did this world come into being? What sort of duties and responsibilities do individuals have? And if we look at religious values, then we can apply that lens, if you like, in other world regions too. If one looks at Islam or at Buddhism or at forms of Christianity, these are very powerful influences on how people make sense of their experiences of the world around them and what sort of agency they attach to themselves as opposed to their gods or to their divinity. So I think there's a religious dimension to this, but there's also, I'm a British geographer. I should be reticent in commenting too deeply on American historical cultures, but there's a certain sense, I think, about the American story, or the story of the American nation that plays in here. It's found some of its founding myths from 200 or 300 years ago about Europeans discovering, quote, a new land, an uninhabited land, a land of abundant resources, escaping some of the tyrannies of church and state from Europe. And this notion of freedom and liberty, which downgraded a sense of dutiful responsibility to the land and to the resources of the land. And so I think there's a deeper cultural reading as well that one can apply to try to begin to explain some of the attitudes that one might encounter amongst some American subgroups of populations that perhaps you wouldn't find quite as powerful in other parts of the world.
Let's extend this conversation, because I'm not convinced that on some level, some of the climate change denial in this country has been supplanted in some way. Whatever it is that, the energy for that climate change denial has been supplanted in some way. And maybe even the alarm of climate change, broadly speaking, has been supplanted by the pandemic. We're just hitting sort of the vaccine mandates are starting to come online in this country, and we're seeing them. They seem to be doing actually fairly well, but we have the lowest vaccination rate in the Western world, and we were ahead. We got out the gate quicker, but what are the similarities in terms of the dynamic that climate change denial, and which, like you say, has diminished now in this country? Still, we're doing better than the rest of the world in climate change denial, I would imagine. And now it feels like we are doing better than the rest of the world in COVID denial in one form or another, which is going to be the opportunity to say we're number one. So,
well, I think there is a connection there. I'm not sure I'm fully competent to be able to disentangle what connects these things, but I certainly would want to start off that attempt at disentangling by coming down to the way in the trust that population groups have in particular state institutions. Science. If we take science, if you want to take science as the connecting thing here, to what extent do Americans trust climate scientists that humans really are changing the climate? To what extent do Americans trust virologists that these vaccines really do protect you against a virus that can potentially be damaging to your health? Trust in science as an institution then becomes critical. And science as an institution is heavily funded and mandated by state institutions, by the federal government, and by the institutions around the federal government that validate and approve, for example, approving vaccines. These are state-based institutions, and science doesn't, if you like, people's trust in science doesn't stand and fall simply on the credibility of an individual scientist or the extent to which an individual piece of scientific research has followed a certain scientific methodology. People's trust in science rises and falls on the much broader question about whether people trust the institutions that govern, fund, mandate, regulate science. And I think, here America suffers and has increasingly suffered over the last couple of 2 or 3 decades as for a variety of reasons, people's trust in federal state institutions has diminished in a much greater way than it has, let's say, in Western Europe. And indeed, probably it would do if one did a similar survey in some of the developing countries or the emerging nations. although there are exceptions here as well. Brazil would be an interesting counterpoint, actually, to apply this analysis to. So Americans, have a low degree of trust in their federal state institutions, and that plays out in low degrees of trust in science. And whether this is cause and effect and chicken and egg, but it's probably not helped. Again, my reading from the other side of the Atlantic is a few years ago, after Trump was elected, there was the mobilization of scientists, the March for Science, I think 2016, 2017, which mobilized huge numbers of scientists and supporters of science in public demonstrations and mass marches around the USA. But what it tended to do, for those Americans who may have had a degree of uncertainty or questioning about science as an institution, it seemed to send a signal that, well, science is no more or less than any other special interest group who will march in defense of their particular interest. It added to this politicization of science. You can take science or you can leave science. It depends on your ideology, and that probably wasn't, in my view, that wasn't a particularly good way of trying to communicate what is best and strongest about science as a method of inquiry into how the physical world operates.
So, I would agree, but I also think that this has been a project. I mean, I don't think it's, we can go back and look at Gertrude Himmelfarb, talking about the idea of the conservative movement undercutting science and experts so that there is no, objective reality. And it also is very helpful to, if your business interests, to not have to subscribe to the scientific conclusion that it's not good for me to pour this chemical into the soil here, or this chemical I can dump it into the river. Why would that be a problem? I mean, there's some real dollar reasons I think that capitalist interests would have to do that, and in some respects, we're number one in that regard.
But on the same time, the Green New Deal, coming from a different political persuasion on the American left or on the political left in Europe as well, that actually the Green New Deal is trying to harness that business interest. It's trying to harness the capitalist instinct to make money on the back here of a new narrative that opens up new technological opportunities to displace fossils. So I'm not sure it's simply a capitalist, it's not sort of a capitalist versus anti-capitalist type story.
That Green New Deal response is a capitulation, at least, to speak the language that is spoken to. That's the dominant one. The problem is that you're talking about entrenched industries are doing well, and even though business or capitalism may do well in the Green New Deal, it's a different set of entrenched interests at that point. But to what extent is there a problem with experts, and what if having scientists come out and appear to be political in this regard? And I remember talking to scientists 15 years ago about this, maybe, during the ClimateGate at the University of Anglica. They did not seem equipped to deal with the rhetorical sort of challenges that they had. They're going against people who are paid to make an argument as to why climate change is not real, and they're not used to having that type of conversation because they're used to having conversations with other scientists. So, with just a couple of minutes left, what are some broad principles that we should follow if we wanted to sort of be more to have less COVID denial or more appreciation for the vaccine? Although, mandates to me are starting to look pretty good based upon what we've seen, at least these soft mandates, these sort of more ultimatum type of situations rather than actually forcing people to take the vaccine.
Yeah. Well, I think that, there are a small number of principles, I think apply more generally in the way in which scientists and scientific institutions communicate, with their publics. One is about honesty and transparency about what is known and what is not known. Science, don't oversell science. And the problem with the ClimateGate issue, which I was sort of a peripheral actor around the edge of back in 2009, was that the climate science was in danger of overselling itself, that it claimed to know more than it really did. And similarly, we've seen some poor instances of science communication about the pandemic as well. And when science runs hot, as it does in a pandemic, and the danger is for scientists to jump a couple of steps beyond themselves. And that's a dangerous move for a scientist to make, where data will always fight back and against claims of hubris and certainty. So be honest and open about what is known and what's not known. And also, ditch the language that maybe not necessarily scientists would always use, although some do, but certainly politicians are quite happy to use this and very rarely get pulled up on it, which is we just follow the science. We're not actually making strategic or value-based or political decisions here. We're just following the science, as though somehow the science tells you what to do in the world. It doesn't tell you how to solve climate change. It doesn't tell you how to eradicate a pandemic. That's not what science tells you to do. What we decide to do as individuals or as collectives is a result of our political and public reasoning. And our political and public reasoning, yes, it looks at the evidence that science can bring forward, but it also relies on a whole bunch of other stuff about political opportunity, about political alliances, about public values, about cultural values. And science does never dictate a singular course of action. And so that sort of language needs to be withdrawn, I think, as well. And I suppose a third point, and I think scientists, certainly around climate change, have become much better at this, and maybe science in general have become much better at this, is finding multiple lines of communication, multiple channels of communication with diverse publics, rather than just hiding behind a scientific paper or speaking to policy advisors in state or federal institutions. Actually, for scientists to find multiple channels of communication with different audiences. And whether in town hall meetings or through different social media, or listening to consumer interest groups, or getting out there and speaking to political associations. The scientists should see themselves very much as public servants and public communicators, rather than as some form of special high priesthood of elite intellectuals.
Well, it's fascinating. Mike Hulme, a professor of human geography at the University of Cambridge, author of Climate Change. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
All right, folks, going to take a quick break. Come back, wrap things up. It's hump day, folks. So we're going to say have a
blessed hump hump day to
yes,
you.
To our Peacock viewers. They will be signing off in a moment. For the rest of you, Emma and I will discuss a little bit. I got a couple IMs about our guest and some of those perspectives. We'll be talking about that and talking more about both the vaccine mandates that we're seeing and what's going to happen with the infrastructure bills. So to those folks watching us on Peacock, we say goodbye. And to those people watching us everywhere else, we say hello. So somebody just said, you seem to disagree with his final points there, Sam. Could you elaborate on what you're thinking? I don't disagree with the idea of just saying follow the science, although I will say, like, I'm not quite sure in our political environment, frankly, that you can make a somewhat nuanced argument as to why we're doing something. And in part, maybe it would be helpful, but like you always hear that in the context of like, of investigations, right? That Congress has. We're just going to follow the evidence. We're going to follow where the evidence leads us. And it's obscuring the idea that, like, look, let's be honest. There's a lot of people who want to come to a certain conclusion.
Right.
And that's what he's talking about in terms of, saying follow the science. Actually, no, what you're doing is not following the science. It's that you are making an assessment as to what is important in society based upon all the different sort of like vested interests. And then you're talking about applying something and making a cost benefit analysis, I guess, of like, and then how do you achieve that goal? And then imposing that public health policy on there. So for instance, we got another email from the guy that we spoke to about the vaccines. And he said in our podcast description or our YouTube description or something that we had said that the vaccine court, it's not really technically a court, but the vaccine court, as it's called, doesn't cover COVID. And in fact, and he said he couldn't find anything about that. And it took me 1 second to Google the government agency that is looking at COVID claims and presumably will pay out. There's a system. There's a process for it. Same as the other vaccinations and other treatments and whatnot. And with billions of shots, you simply cannot tie up. You couldn't even tie up the courts, our actual courts in this way. And so the reality is people are going to react to the COVID vaccine. Some people are going to have adverse reactions that are going to be tiny, and a very, very small amount of people are going to have serious adverse reactions. The science says that's the case. But we don't necessarily, from a public policy, health policy standpoint, we would have to talk for 100 hours before we would give an accurate representation. If we were 100 hours of the value of the vaccine, if when we brought up the number of cases where someone, let's say, dies from the vaccine, to make a to make it the proportion, to really express the proportion, right? As soon as we say a person died of the vaccine, we are disproportionately emphasizing that relative to the amount of times that we say, like, how many people have actually like been protected from COVID.
It's lined with disproportional emphasis.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very difficult to do. And but the science would say, yes, one person did die. But once you start to like actually, you're taking this into the realm of communicating of public health, everything changes.
It's the same as climate change.
Sorry?
the way that they attack climate change, saying like it's colder here now, and look at the snowball.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and it's like, and the reality is like, we don't know how climate change impacted a specific hurricane. We don't know if, you know, the flooding that ends up killing 5 people, was that climate change? Well, maybe there was a percentage. There's certainly a likelihood. I mean, it's a very hard thing to assess. We know.
Well, debating that just gives credence to that very framing, and it should not be treated as a debate.
Exactly. I mean, like we know, broadly speaking, if you step back far enough, maybe you can't look at these 5 deaths in this one storm, but you look at like all the deaths in the storms of the past 5 years. You know that a percentage of them was probably attributable to climate change because sea level rise, because the ocean's hotter. I mean, it's a very sort of like a difficult situation. I'm not quite sure that with the forces that we have in our society, that nuance, you know, I don't know if approaching the nuance in a sort of like more transparent way would necessarily help. You know,
I don't think it would. I think it would do the opposite. I mean, I think that
particularly in an emergency.
Right. And there are people who weaponize nuance in order to make broad sweeping generalizations.
I know. I feel like we play video of them every day.
Some of those people we may see in the fun half.
It's very possible.
In
fact, speaking of which, folks, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only support the free half of the show, you not only help this show survive and thrive, you also get extra content. JoinTheMajorityReport.com. Also, don't forget, MajorityDiscord.com. Over 4,000 members of our Discord community now. Great resource, great place to hang out. And don't forget justcoffee.coop. I almost forgot. Justcoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code Majority. Get 10% off. And you can get our app at majorityapp.com and check it out. Matt, what's happening in the Matt Leckian universe of media?
Yeah, more climate change stuff tonight on Left Reckoning. We have Adrian Martinez and Sam Goodman of Costa Rica-based La Ruta del Clima talking about COP26 and the Escazú Agreement, which is basically like don't abuse the human rights or indeed threaten violence against environmental defenders. So talk about that and talk about kind of how you talk about recovery and mitigation, but it's been a struggle for countries to get the UN to look at loss and damage, which is kind of related to what we're talking about in terms of like countries that are really just like small island countries that are just not going to be able to deal and mitigate. You're just going to need to give them cash. And it looks like there might be something moving in that in COP26, although COP26 has also let activists down, or the COP conferences have let activists down a lot. So talk about that tonight. So for a view from Costa Rica for climate change tonight, patreon.com/Left Reckoning, 8 Eastern on YouTube.
That's a great companion show for today.
It is.
We didn't even plan that out.
No, we didn't.
Well, what's the big climate meeting that's happening right now?
COP26.
Oh yeah, that's
November,
okay. That's what you just said. Right. So there you go.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920 is the number if you want to call into the program. And also, you can IM the show at majorityapp.com. Pick up the app and just IM us that way. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back, 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 back. boy is back, and the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back, and the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males...
Psych. Fuck them.
Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
Back.
We're back. It is the fun half. I should say right up front, got an IM. Oh, I just lost it. Where was it? From TNAV. Emma, where did you get your sweater? My fiance would absolutely love to have one.
I got it from a store called Dynamite, which I believe is here in Brooklyn.
There you go. All right. So now I guess, are we at close, like it was October 1, the deadline for vaccine mandates? Was that what was going on? The timeline that
I thought for New York State.
Well, New York State, the vaccine mandate for healthcare workers was today, correct?
It's the article I read in the New York Times said it went into effect Monday. Yeah.
And I would imagine there was a certain amount of, like, there's a deadline that the mandate went into effect Monday. The deadline, I don't know. I mean, obviously you can't do it in one day, but it's very short. And apparently 92% of the state, this is in New York State, of the state's more than 650,000 hospital and nursing home workers had received at least one vaccine dose, according to state officials. That is as of Monday. That the deadline must be in a couple of days. It says days before the deadline. So there will be, they're still seeing, now it appears that in New York anyways, there does not seem to be, in New York State, the shortage of medical care workers that they had anticipated. There's going to be some short, but For instance, in Rochester, Strong Memorial Hospital, on Monday, they had announced they'd bring their vaccination rate to almost 96%. I imagine, and remember, there are staff exemptions. Fewer than 300 of 16,000 employees. That's in New York. Similar story in, United Airlines. Also a similar dynamic. Hundreds of thousands of their employees vaccinated. So the vaccine mandates seem to be working. And at least, to the extent that we have data at this point, 593 out of 67, I should say, not the hundreds of thousands, sorry, tens of thousands, 593 people out of 67,000 workers could face termination from United Airlines if they don't get vaccinated. A North Carolina-based hospital system, and this was also sort of problematic in terms of the Washington Post. Paragraph 1, a North Carolina-based hospital system announced Monday, and this was the headline. North Carolina hospital system fires 175 workers in one of the largest ever mass terminations due to a vaccine mandate. I mean, that's okay.
That's very specific.
Yeah, that's pretty qualified.
What about
We
like
should also
layoffs?
Yeah, we should make it clear that paragraph 1, you hear 175 unvaccinated employees were fired, failing to comply with the organization's mandatory coronavirus vaccination policy. Paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4, paragraph 5. Paragraph 6, more than 99% of the system's roughly 35,000 employees have followed the mandatory vaccination program. So if you looked at the headline, you would think like, oh my God, this is a mass termination. And I don't want people to lose their jobs.
This is exactly what Matt was saying in terms of lying by emphasis.
Yes, exactly.
Right. It's not necessarily lying, but it is emphasizing the firings in order to maybe play up the salaciousness or the totalitarian nature that anti-vaxxers are afraid of.
Yeah, it's just something that can be passed around by anti-vaxxers. And then if you dig deep, you can get down to that other story. So that's what's happening with vaccine mandates around the country. It seems like there's a pretty decent compliance, and as the vaccines get deployed, we're seeing a drop across the country in almost every state. I think North Dakota and Alaska are still having positive increases in infection rates. But across the country, it's starting to drop. Here is Fox and Friends getting a narrower and narrower territory in which to scaremonger here.
What's the next thing they're going to ask us to do? So now they want us to take this vaccine. Are we going to jail? Parents that don't get their kids vaccinated? Because guess what's coming in the next 2 weeks? Vaccinations for 5 and up. So are you going to just jail a parent at a time so one can raise the kid while the other's been incarcerated? Is that where we're heading?
All right, couple of things here. Brian Kilmeade, having worked at Fox under the mandate that Fox had that you get vaccinated, has been vaccinated earlier than probably all of us. We should just say, we know that. No one is going to jail for not getting vaccinated. 5 to 11-year-olds, probably be closer to Thanksgiving, maybe mid-November when they will be eligible, it looks like, will not be sent to jail, and they will not lose their job if they don't get vaccinated. What is conceivable is like every other vaccination requirement to go to public school, they will be required to get a vaccination to go to public school. That seems, I think, unlikely, but conceivable. But where was he on the whole, I don't know, the DPS vaccination and vaccinations for hepatitis? Has he been complaining about that? Because kids can't go to school unless they have a hepatitis vaccination.
I haven't heard such complaints from him, especially because he's in the Fox News studio and himself is very likely vaccinated.
No. We know for a fact that Fox mandated that their people got vaccinated.
I know, but he's also like a wealthy host, so maybe the rules weren't going to apply to him entirely, but I bet he's vaccinated. Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, they're all vaccinated.
Right.
Here are the New York State immunization requirements that have been up. I do not think, let's see, diphtheria, that's the DTP, and pertussis vaccine, or DTaP, they sometimes call it, or Tdap. Hepatitis B vaccine, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, that's the MMR, the polio vaccine, the chickenpox vaccine. Additional vaccines, those are required for daycare, pre-K, and school attendance. Additional vaccine required for middle school and high school, Tdap, and I don't know, I can't pronounce that. Additional vaccines required for daycare and pre-K, hemophilia influenza type B vaccine. The point being that these vaccine requirements already exist. Now, I don't know that they're going to exist for COVID, but they're so desperate to scaremonger over this. It's fascinating.
This is like Jordan Peterson saying he was going to get thrown in the gulag if he used the wrong pronoun for somebody in a class.
Right.
Exactly.
Mild inconvenience accounts for or adds up to systemic oppression. That's usually how it goes. And you can extrapolate that for every topic Fox News covers for the most part when it comes to their own grievances.
It really is at this point. And YouTube apparently is shutting down some of those misinformation channels.
Yeah.
I just saw Jimmy Dore just had a live show the other day. Vaccine contradictions is what he called it.
Interesting.
In the title. Vaccine contradictions. Curious to watch that. Maybe we should pull that up.
Juice that engagement.
Vaccine contradictions. This vaccine, emphasizing the vaccine contradictions, is sort of the clickbait of the day of people who think that their audience are morons or they themselves are morons. And we don't have a clip from the contradictions that Jimmy Dore pointed out. I haven't.
There's also a third option. There's also a third option.
Well, we do have somebody who has to do. What's the third option?
No, I mean, like he sees that when he talks about the squad and he talks about Democrats in a negative way, specifically progressives, specifically women, lots of upvotes, lots of views.
Sure.
And then when you're talking about maybe things that are a little bit more aligned with the left at this point with the audience you've cultivated, you get down votes. So you lean into certain things and lean away from others.
Very possibly. Or if you just have a right-wing audience, it seems to do quite well for you. I give you Steven Crowder.
1 second.
All right. So look, this is just a few days ago, and I was reading this. The BBC published this article. Look at the headline. The headline is, in COVID in Wales, a third of positive cases are unvaccinated.
Oh, no.
Wait. That's a strange way to say 2/3 of positive cases are vaccinated.
Yeah. It really is. They like to pepper up the
Wait,
headline.
the vast majority of cases are vaccinated, you say?
But did you hear me? What I said?
And by the way, the headline doesn't really make sense. You have to read the article because it goes into more detail. And it actually seems like the numbers may not even be accurate in the title, but it says 45% of cases are among the vaccinated, 20% they don't know.
Oh, okay.
But 80% of hospitalized patients in Wales are vaccinated.
What?
80% of hospitalized patients are vaccinated. And they'll say, well, it's because most of the population is vaccinated. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You don't talk about that with measles, mumps, rubella. You don't. If the vaccine works, it doesn't matter if 95% of the population is vaccinated and they make up only 85% of the hospitals. It sucks.
I'm just curious. You just said that 1/3 were unvaccinated. That's confirmed. 20% are kind of in the wind. We're not sure. And you're telling me 80%. That's what matters.
In the hospital.
No, 80% are in the hospital with 1/3 unvaccinated. So it doesn't matter if you think your entire country is almost vaccinated. They're not, because 1/3's not.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Does not make any sense. It's terrible.
It's just a very interesting way. This is where you have to read articles, and I'll be working on a project to hopefully help people with this. Our links are in sources.
Okay.
They're all available in the
Pause it for a
description.
second. Yeah, you really do need to read the article. In fact, let's do that. Let's read the article and assess how either A, disingenuous Steven Crowder is, or stupid, and how, without a doubt, how stupid his producer is, who doesn't seem to be able to do any of this. Let's read this article and understand COVID-19 in Wales. 1/3 of positive cases are unvaccinated. 1/3 of positive cases. So okay, so the figures showed here, 99% of people who tested positive for COVID in the past week of Wales were under 60. Of these, 37% were unvaccinated. Okay, so let's just work that out for a second. 99% of the people who tested positive for COVID in the past week were under 60. So you've got 100 people who are COVID positive. 99 of them are under 60, and only 37% were unvaccinated. So that means that, let's just call it all 100 were under 60. So you had 63 were vaccinated, 37 were unvaccinated. But what is the vaccination rate of Wales?
It's in the next, yeah, here we go. Oh, no. Sorry. The next, why are so many vaccinated people in the hospital?
Well, the sheer number of vaccinated, nearly 95% of over 60 and 84% under 60. Okay, so you have two groups of people. You have the 100 people who have COVID, and 63% of them are vaccinated. But the society at large, 85% of them are vaccinated. You see the difference there? You are more likely to get infected or show a positive a positive COVID test if you are unvaccinated. 3 times, 4 times, it seems like, right? Is that more or less 37% as opposed to
15?
15%?
3 times?
2.5, 3. So you're 2.5 more times likely to catch it. And remember, a lot of those vaccinated people, I imagine, are also, in terms of their behavior, functioning like they're vaccinated, and they're not as worried about getting sick.
After this graph is where it really explains it. After this one.
So vaccine, the hospital figures?
Yeah, right. Just scroll down to that, right.
So
the red graph.
Hospital admissions between fully vaccinated and unvaccinated. Over 60, fully vaccinated, I see, okay. Unvaccinated, the over 60 rate is huge. Vaccinated is half that. So you can see that you have twice as, if you are over 60 and you are unvaccinated, in Wales, you are twice as likely to get into the hospital with COVID. If you are under 60, you are almost 4.5 times more likely to go into the hospital if you are unvaccinated.
Yeah, Wales has an insane vaccination rate. Like you said, 85% for the under 60. The 16 to 17-year-olds are like 70% for the whole state. So that's more, or 70% is 30%. They're saying 1/3 of the people in the hospitals are unvaccinated. So you can see vaccines work.
And to be clear, I don't know, maybe Crowder rails against flu vaccinations each year, but the flu vaccination rate is much, much less effective. And it still helps society.
Did you see that stat that they wrote out beneath there, broken down the hospital admissions rate for under 60s is 3.5 times higher for unvaccinated people? Yeah, okay, never mind.
I mean, but there it is. And so Crowder says to read the article, we did.
Yeah.
Apparently, I don't know if he read the article. If he did, he's just lying. His producer
definitely didn't
understand the dynamic.
Right. I think that they just read the headline and then they see that it's able to fit into their narrative, and they, of course, don't have any interest in looking at the gradations.
I remember a story by Rush Limbaugh that he was reading, which was clearly like that. His producers had pulled this thing.
Yeah.
And he was reading like, oh, this is a perfect example of the environmental crazies. We're worried about global climate change. This is about 15 years ago. And he's like going, they have put a tinfoil top on a ski resort. I think it was in Switzerland or something. And this is how crazy these environmentalists are because of supposed global climate change. He starts reading the article, the body of the article, and it says, and he goes, an environmentalist complained that the ski resort should not do this because it creates, some type of runoff. And he quickly had to sort of like, let's take a break. And it was hilarious to see. I imagine that producer got fired, but that's basically what the story is. Like they're going to take this, they're going to put it in there, and they're going to twist the numbers. And the idea that you have a vaccine that inhibits hospitalizations, inhibits deaths, and inhibit infections, 100% no. Even if it's like 35, 45, 55% better, you get a better chance. If it's not, 4.5 times more likely that you are going to get COVID, that is a benefit of a vaccine. And then when you contemplate what is the downsides of that vaccine, what are the risks? You get a reaction. Maybe you don't feel well for a day or two. That shingles vaccine that I took, that knocked me out for like 2 days.
That messed you up a bit. You feeling all right now?
Yeah, still sore over here though. And that's a week later.
I hear that's a bear.
It is, but it's worth it.
Yeah,
is my understanding. That's crowded for you. Let's open up the phone lines. Go to the right. Crowder wants to focus on percentages but ignores rates. Percentages sound scary.
It's funny the way he just says it doesn't matter. Like, no, it matters. It's exactly, it definitely matters.
Yeah.
Totally matters. Finally, Punk for Life, AC Punk for Life. Finally a member as of today. Oh, congratulations. Thank you. Give you one of these. Anyway, can't help but think the Pelosi-Biden wing gets a win-win-win no matter what happens. The framing of this in the media requires progressives to defend. This means if shit goes well, narrative, it will happen despite progressives. If it goes wrong, it will be blamed on them. There's no way Biden Pelosi defend progressives after it. If it goes bad, then they get to hammer the blame home, going home into midterms. We know Pelosi in particular has much animosity towards progressives as she does Republicans. I worry this blows up for progressives. I don't think so. It really does feel like this narrative is congealing around cinema. And I agree with you that I don't know if progressives will get the credit necessarily if we get a $2.5 trillion, let's say, infrastructure bill in addition to the bipartisan framework. But progressives win insofar as the policies get passed. You're providing money for housing. You're providing prescription drug relief. You're providing, progressives win in that instance. So I don't know.
Yeah, they do. But the framing that we talked about the other day of how they're still going to say progressives are the ones blocking Biden's agenda. If this comes up for a vote, we better hope Pelosi doesn't bring it up for a vote and it fails, because if they have the simple headline of a vote failing, I have my concerns about how that blame is going to fall.
Yeah, very possibly. But we should say, in terms of if they do prevail, this was going to be the last piece of legislation for this administration, more than likely, last piece of legislation.
Yeah,
that's going to pass. Who knows what could happen in the midterms, but I would bet on this being the last piece of major legislation to pass. And when we start getting into 2024, the Pelosi-Biden wing of the party, they're not going to be there, those two anyways. I don't think so. I think there's going to be a new generation of people. You're just going to see a couple more people who are going to sort of fall into that camp of squad or squad adjacent.
Yeah, we pray.
Emma has been way louder than Sam the whole show.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot we can do about it.
Yeah, sorry. I've been trying to, I don't know if I'm trying to be a little quieter, back off the mic, talk a little less just to mitigate it, but.
Can you turn up my my Focusrite?
Turn it up?
The output from my computer? The output maybe from my computer. Or the Slate Mac.
No, we can't.
All right. Maybe we should work on that later. Calling from an 832 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Daniel. I'm calling from Texas.
Daniel from Texas.
Yes, I'm calling in. I'm going to give a little background on me. I'm a former objectivist, libertarian-leaning person. I've held like these views for maybe the past 10 years, and it's just and it's recently this year that I pretty much kind of crossed over into the leftist field. And as someone with these ideas, the one thing that became very common with debates that I've held, because what drew me to your show was the show with Yarn Brook, which was important and interesting to me, because Yarn Brook, again, was the what do you call him, leader of the Ayn Rand Institute, whatever think tank they like to circle jerk around, basically. And when I watched it, it's where the contradictions that I held, or not really contradictions, but more of, I noticed the arguments that y'all made against them in the circles, the circle talking that they do. And I feel like I can be maybe an explanation, maybe explain these reasons why they believe what they think. Because in my personal view, I argue that libertarianism in of itself was highly influenced by like Ayn Rand and objectivism. And I think a lot more than people like to think that they do. And I think one of the biggest things that leftists and progressives in general do is ignore her and say that she's not worth speaking about. And I argue 100% that that's a fatal flaw, and we never should have done that. I believe that the left should take her seriously, because I really believe that if we can understand her beliefs 100%, that we can argue against libertarian think points, because they don't realize that the arguments that they're making can be pulled straight out of the Fountainhead, straight out of Atlas Shrugged. One only needs to read like the words she said to know like where they got, like, the right gets these ideas from, like parasites, or personal liberty, personal responsibilities, like where they pull this nonsense from, because we have to understand that Ayn Rand, when she defined her philosophy objectivism, she pretty much tried to like rewrite philosophy and basically justify capitalism and giving it that philosophical foundation. And we can throw around all the time. It's like, oh, well, she's not. It's like, she's nonsense.
My experience of a lot of libertarians is that they embrace Ayn Rand. I mean, maybe some of them don't know.
To an extent. And and this is where I will put that line. So it's like when I saw the title calling Yarn Brook libertarian, in objectivist view, it makes, like, again, I'm still kind of have the after effects of having these views for so long that, like, calling them libertarian still makes me cringe, because in Rand's words, she would have completely went on a probably a 30-minute tangent saying how she's not a libertarian, she hates libertarians, and she called them anarchists, basically. So it's like, I think the big mistake we make is comparing libertarianism and objectivism as the same thing, because they're foundationally, to objectivists, they're not. they're completely two different ideologies. To Ayn Rand herself, she considered libertarians to be a complete plagiarist of her work. Like, where do you think the non-aggression principle became popularized from? Was through Ayn Rand. Like, read Atlas Shrugged when she's pretty much at the end of John Galt's speech. She says, I swear by my life and my love of it that I'll never live for the sake of another man, nor ask another to live for mine. That is the philosophical, moral basis for their entire ethics. It is that personal responsibility. So when they say personal responsibility, they are meaning on the outright that rights are inalienable, that rights then and of themselves are given through the government, not through the fact that you were born. So that is the underlining premise where rights come from. And we need to understand that fully. Even like Rand, like I wrote up.
Wait a second. Wait. Say that last part, that personal responsibility implies that rights are given by government?
Yes.
How so?
In a, let me find, because I'm currently doing my own little project of kind of proving it wrong for my own sense, because it's like after reading. But anyways, let me answer your question, because now I'm just going on a ramble.
I will say that Wayne Kerr on the IM says the difference between objectivism and libertarianism is important for 0.3% of the population. I would agree with that. I am curious.
But I'm not talking about the 0.3%. I'm talking about in an intellectual conversation, because even like, let me argue in this way. Rand said many times that the way to change society is through the way of philosophy. And I feel like she has, in a way, because her views are still being viewed. And the thing that she is accepted among libertarian groups is she, like, being one who was inside the groups, I will tell you firsthand from my own anecdotal, so please don't assume I'm making a statement about it, but saying that her work in libertarian circles is usually kind of, they take her work, but they don't exactly respect her in the way.
So wait a second. So let me just ask you. I'm not 100% sure of the point you're trying to make here. That if I was to tell a libertarian, hey man, you're really an objectivist. You know, you're an Ayn Randian objectivist.
No, they won't. Yeah, they won't accept that. But it's
okay. But what is the value of that? I mean, what is the value of that? Of what you're saying to me? I mean, I know that it's interesting to you, and that's fine. But I mean, what is the value of it?
The value is of that basically how Rand herself states rights as, because she states rights in.
Yeah, but but here's the thing, man. Here's the thing.
Okay.
These things are only important within libertarian circles. Like
they are.
Yeah, but
right.
And so, you know, for my purposes, to be honest with you, I don't really care. I like the taxonomy of these different things is less relevant to me than the sort of the broad strokes of the ideology. And I've never, ever taken a call from a libertarian who has identified themselves as believing the same form of libertarianism as the previous libertarian I got a call from. I've never had two in a row of a libertarian defining themselves as a the same, like a utilitarian libertarian or an objectivist or a deontologist libertarian. Like I don't care. Like it's like, honestly, it's like that's like it's like. I'd be more interested in just sort of like Dungeons and Dragons, categories than that. And I'm not saying
about
that they're
Marvel
not related,
categories.
I agree, but I'm just saying, like, where are some points y'all brought up? Like, again,
I got to jump. Like 8 minutes.
Maybe you're saying though that understanding Ayn Rand is helpful in our quest to debunk libertarians. Perhaps that's an easy way to come to a consensus here.
I hung up on him.
Okay, well,
8
then
minutes.
He says, "I agree." Thank you.
I gotta say that. Like, he was. I could deal with him now, but I mean, when he was a libertarian, it would be extremely annoying.
The most interesting thing of this sort of splitting the hair of between the objectivist versus whatever kind of libertarian to me is that it's a there but for the grace of God go the socialist movement, and splitting itself into all sorts of different schisms named after, you know, people that died 50 years ago and that sort of thing. Like, it's embarrassing. It's mental masturbation, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, that is, and there has been a, you know, I don't feel like we're out of the woods yet in that regard.
Again, and it's also more than mental masturbation too, because it's a way to like imbue your belief system with like artificial seriousness. The more you classify it, the more specific it becomes, the more intellectual it can sound. And then what do you know? My belief in this insane sociopathic libertarian ideology is actually quite clinical and sensible.
Rationality gone haywire.
Yeah.
Calling from a 308 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it's Kowalski from Nebraska.
Kowalski from Nebraska. What's on your mind, Kowalski?
Well, I don't know if you caught my IM or not, but I had just a quick little rhetorical thing I wanted to mention today, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So in your discussion, you talked about how people use religion to justify, you know, not doing anything about climate change because it's part of God's supposed plan. And I will agree, especially across Nebraska while campaigning, I've heard that statement a lot, to which I have always countered with religious phrases as well, because I've always viewed, I think a lot of people don't really utilize religion to get the point across of leftist and socialist values, because it's like Cornel West and, you know, Martin Luther King Jr. used religion extensively to promote socialist and, you know, racial ideals. And I think that utilizing religion and meeting, you know, 70% of the American population who believes in some form of Abrahamic faith is a good way of meeting people where they are, and not allowing basically capital to utilize probably the biggest cultural unifier within our society. So to that end, I've always responded with, we were charged by God in the book of Genesis to be the stewards of the earth, and we were told under the story of King Solomon to always choose wisdom, since our wise men tell us that climate change is a big threat to the environment, and we have been charged with its protection. God has charged us to fix the environment. Clearly, he's telling us this. Now, I know many people probably wouldn't actually view that like as reality, but as just a talking point to meet people where they are, I found it's very effective, because if you can no longer use God as a defense, and that's your whole defense for your worldview, you're kind of either broken or you'll see it in a different light.
Fair enough.
Do you think there's salience to that argument? Or?
I do. I mean, I think, you know, I mean, people have raised that argument in times before, and if it's effective with your audience, you know, it's Old Testament stuff. I don't know if that counts.
Which is the Good Testament.
Well,
I'm messing with you.
You don't need to you don't need to tell me that. I'm a Jew. I don't even recognize the second one.
Kowalski, you're going to run.
Well, as a Lutheran who went to a Lutheran parochial school for 10 years, I know the stories pretty well.
I think that's good, Kowalski.
It might be an easier argument for me. Oh, I'm sorry. What?
No, I think it's smart to achieve fluency with the people you're trying to persuade.
Yeah.
I was watching Steven Crowder with Jordan Peterson recently, and he told Jordan Peterson that he is basically against like climate change mitigation stuff, because the Bible says go conquer the beasts and all that sort of stuff. So I think there might be some dueling in scripture when you get into those fields, but outside of a right-wing ideologue, you might have some effective there.
Certainly, certainly can't hurt.
Oh, go ahead.
Certainly can't hurt.
No, just remember, in many ways, religion is like a tool, like a hammer or a gun. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. It's all in the hands of the beholder. But if the person that you're arguing with objectively holds an idea that is going to cause harm, like not caring about climate change, then, you know, pretty much anything to get them to change their mind is probably a good idea.
Appreciate the call, Kowalski.
Hey,
Thanks,
you guys
Kowalski.
have a good rest of your week. Goodbye.
We will.
Chumologist says the messenger is the key in any religious context. There is 0% chance any Christian will listen to an average outside leftist with no position in the church.
I like the concept of Crowder. What was it? Defeating the beast and like just running,
conquering like the beast of the field or whatever.
Yeah, just running into the heart of a hurricane.
Let's try to conquer Sam Seder first.
Yeah. Right. All right, I guess you're not a beast to him, so maybe he isn't as.
He doesn't have to get activated at that point.
He's not as anti-Semitic as he comes off, perhaps.
Calling from a 467 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 467.
Hello, is this me?
Yeah. Wait, maybe it's.
All right. Excuse me?
Go ahead.
How you doing, Rich? My name is Richard, long-time listener, second-time caller.
Where?
I'm calling from the Kingdom of Sweden.
The Kingdom of Sweden.
Yes, next to exactly. Next to Norway.
Right, of course.
Byggeland?
Of course. I don't know where Sweden is, but I know where Norway is.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
really?
What's up?
No, I'm being facetious. But yes, go ahead.
Typical American, I think.
Right, exactly.
He's giving a he's
Get up. So I was laughing when I heard the last caller here, because I was going to call in to give you some pointers as to how you convince people about climate change, and he brought up religion, and really I do not have a an answer to that because that's a problem that we never run across in Sweden. We're pretty secular, you know, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
that's a typical American problem, I would say. I don't have an answer to that because I don't know my Bible that much, that well.
We're envious. Yeah.
Excuse me?
We're envious.
But
she's
what
envious.
was that?
Yes, we're envious.
Never mind.
Go ahead. Continue.
Okay. Oh, you're envious. Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. I understand. Well, what I was going to say is that I didn't listen to the whole interview with the guest today, but as you said, at least what I took from it, what you said after the interview, that it's kind of hard to actually prove that, for example, the weather that we have, or the hurricanes and everything, that each hurricane is it's very hard to prove that it's because of climate change. I mean, it's not hard to prove if you are a scientist, but it's kind of hard to prove to people that one specific event
it's hard to prove. Yes, it's hard to prove one specific event to attribute climate change to one specific event.
Exactly. And a lot of people are pretty simple-minded, but I would like to say this. If you drive a car, for example, there are about 200 other reasons for not driving a car, or for not extracting oil, or doing things. I mean, the last 100 years, the human race, or the planet has been experiencing about 2,000 new chemicals that we have been exposed to for the last 100 years. 2,000 new chemicals. So there are so many other things. I mean, when you say climate change, you say CO2, right? And people say, well, CO2 is not that bad. We breathe it, we breathe out CO2, blah, blah, blah. But if you talk about cadmium, if you talk about lead, if you talk about all these other things that extracting of oil and fossil fuels and burning it really does to the planet, I think you can reach people a little bit easier than only talk about climate change. Climate change is the big thing, yes, but so is
Well, the problem with that is
the
problem with that. What you're talking about is that's actually the tack that Donald Trump took. I want to clean rivers. I want clean air, and so.
And clean is very loose.
Yeah, it's so
true. But if people knew how much crap that goes out in the exhaust when you drive a diesel car, for example. People really knew that. You could, I think you could, in a roundabout way, actually, maybe convince them that driving cars is not that good. You understand what I mean?
I understand what you mean, my man, but I got news for you. In this country, you go after somebody's car, you might as well be like trying to take their child away. Appreciate the call. Tough to go after. Here we go. What's this? Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, this is, we got a water cooler in here.
We did. Yes, we did.
We got a water cooler. Pretty exciting.
Very
have
nice.
A water cooler in the office.
It's nice when it does a little gurgle.
Yep.
This is the nice water cooler, and we all stand around it, and it sustains
just
us.
Where we catch up.
Unlike this right-wing show.
On the water cooler with David Brody, however, Marjorie Taylor Greene came up with a very good argument in her mind for essentially doing forced births, right? I mean, she wants to outlaw abortion and force women to carry to term embryos and fetuses. And here is why.
And if we really care about women, like we say we do, then we should be telling women that the best thing they can ever do in their whole life is to be a mother. Being a mother is the greatest thing I have ever done in my whole life. No matter what I do my entire life, I will never do anything greater than being a mother. It is a true gift. Whether a pregnancy is planned, whether the baby is born perfectly healthy or not, being a mother is life-changing, life-altering, and makes women better people. And these abortions, like you just mentioned, these are actually things that can scar your body. They hurt you internally. And they not only that, they scar your soul. And women have to live with this. We should care for women, love for women, and teach them, how to care for themselves. And that would be being proud to be a mom.
Hard to know where to start here, except for to ask, how old's our oldest child or youngest child?
I don't know. Maybe we should get her child on the horn to see if they're proud that she's their mom.
My point being that she's 47 years old. She's still of childbearing age. Why doesn't she keep having more kids? Why is she spending her time outside the house right now?
Yeah, do what you're best at, apparently.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure.
This is meanwhile, Cori Bush is going public with the story of her abortion. I believe it might have been the product of an assault or something like that. But I mean, that's who I would probably listen to over Marjorie Taylor Greene.
It really is. I mean, it is amazing to me, this whole notion of with the number of abortions in this country, and the number of religious people who get abortions, the number of abortions that Donald Trump paid for, this notion that you are scarred forever, or that you're scarred at all, is absurd.
Right.
Straight out of it, anti-abortion church pamphlets.
And again, if you have an emotional reaction to wanting to have an abortion and you say have conflicting feelings about it, that is absolutely your right, and I'm sorry about that. But if you are a woman who feels it's 100% the right decision, and it was it's something that you don't want to happen in your life, you also have the right to not feel sad about it, right? It's about having the choice. And when she talks about scarring there, she was referring to someone's soul, basically, right? I mean, or was it about the woman's internal organs?
I think you're arguing both.
Both. Yeah. And then that also serves a function of, similar to how they talk about vaccines, as needing to be a part of this grand consultation with a doctor that you probably don't have because you probably don't have insurance. And if you do, I don't know if your doctor's going to cover a visit just so you can talk about a vaccine that over 1 billion of jabs have been administered at this point. You heighten the anxiety around a medical procedure or around something involving science to make it seem unnatural and harmful. And that's what she's doing there, even if it's unconsciously, because she's not super bright with the scarring conversation.
And permanent. That's the whole thing with the vaccine, right? It's like it's the damage is permanent.
As
There's
is
no going back once you get the vaccine, once you have an abortion, all of these interventions by science, they're permanent. You're permanently scarred.
And with women, you're permanently less of a woman. Because if you wanted to really be a better person, which is what she's saying there, you'd have that child, but instead you're choosing to scar yourself and not be a full woman by doing your godly duty of having kids.
I don't have, and maybe Bradley, you can look this up, but I would bet that the overwhelming majority of abortions are sought by a woman who either is a mom or will be a mom.
Right.
I mean, overwhelming. So having abortions does not prevent you from being a mother. Very often it is gives you the opportunity to be a better mother because you have the number of children that you can care for, work with. I mean, it really does beg the question, why is she even in that studio? Why isn't she with her children, the ones that she just had? Like, why would she stop having children at any point until she just no longer could?
She should be back getting busy with her trainer. Time to pop some more kids out. I mean, and maybe just it's like that affair kind of doubled her chances, I guess. So she was doing her godly duty.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing she says about being a mother changes your life. It's like, yeah, that's why people are hesitant to go through it when they aren't prepared for it.
Exactly. Yeah. And you know who else's life it changes? The kid that's born. The kid that's born.
Yesterday, in the Senate Armed Services Committee, apparently Mark Milley said that our leaving was a strategic mistake. I mean, the idea that the military leaders would be against a pullout from a war is not in any way remotely surprising.
Yeah, what happened to Commander-in-Chief Biden? I don't know. It's weird that you're publicly saying this.
It really seems inappropriate. Like, you know, the idea that like I'm going to present. You don't have other staffers or people who work for the president talk about what their advice was. But
meanwhile, by the way, if it was a surge, he'd be testifying in Congress, talking about the bravery and the leadership of Commander-in-Chief. But I digress.
Here is Elizabeth Warren questioning Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin.
Austin, knowing what you know now, if we had stayed in Afghanistan for another year, would it have made a fundamental difference?
Again, it depends on what size you remain in at and what your objectives are. There are a range of possibilities, but if you stayed there at a force posture of 2,500, certainly you'd be in a fight with the Taliban, and you'd have to reinforce.
So re-engage, yeah, right.
Is staying there. The option was you put in more troops and you just keep doing what we've been doing and hope that the next 20 years are going to bring about a different result than the past 20 years, or you get out. Those are the two options.
Yeah, if your objectives are like to move up the ranks in the military and continue getting promotions, you would want the occupation to continue. So right. I think that should be thought of when generals are asked and other people are asked what they think. Maybe we should hear about like the grunts thing.
Okay. Oh, this is good. So Manu Raju on CNN says, Manchin told me that won't happen. When asked about Pelosi saying there needs to be a deal on legislative language with the White House on reconciliation to get progressives to support infrastructure tomorrow. No one's been negotiating against along those lines with other parties here. Also from Manu Raju, talks are underway among top senators to avoid a potential lapse in funding for the highway programs at risk of expiring Friday if the infrastructure bill hasn't passed. In other words, Nancy Pelosi, and David Dayen pointed it out quite well in his American Prospect piece, has been lying, saying that we need to pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Otherwise, the highway programs expire on Friday. There are other ways in which to pass the highway programs, like by just passing the highway programs. And apparently, talks are underway among top senators to avoid a potential lapse in that funding. Senators Capito and Carper are talking a short-term extension potentially into October or even December. So they're trying to line up all these things and give a little more time for the reconciliation bill to either happen or not. I wonder if there's going to be a vote tomorrow.
I don't think so.
That's
my prediction. I'd be surprised. Pelosi's not going to bring it up. If she did, as I mentioned earlier, I would have a lot of concerns about what that sets up progressives as in terms of the villains that the media is going to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. She would alienate 40 or 50 members of her caucus, and I don't know if that's a really smart thing to do.
Yeah, and in like the New York Times, I think, or maybe the Washington Post was reporting that certain industry groups are pushing moderate Republicans to vote for and commit to voting for the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which would actually kill the end, but they won't do it. They can't get out of their own way with their extremism. But that would be. I don't
think Pelosi wants to bring that up either, to be honest with you.
I don't think
she wants to win that with Republican votes. That's going to make her look even worse.
Yeah.
If she brings it up for a vote and it goes down, I think she needs a better excuse than the members of her caucus. Because the question is like, why would you bring that up if you knew it was going to fail?
Right.
It is only to make the point that we had a deal and we need to do that. So Oliver Wendell Homeslice, the Dems are being held hostage by the debt ceiling and the filibuster is like some kid terrified to get off the couch because his big brother told him the floor is lava. Indeed. Left-handed stranger. I posted that Ryan Grimm tweet about COVID conservatives versus non-conservative death rates. My conservative dad ignored my text to him asking to try and convince my siblings to get the vax. Another conservative asked me, where'd you get that graph from? The news? As if she were scolding me for watching the news. I hope her scolding for getting info from the news isn't a sign of a larger trend. I don't want to go from my sources are better than your sources to defending the already bad track record of news outlets. This is in Centra, Republican plus 20, Texas. Which username do you like better? Mine, left-handed stranger or can Jesus swim on land? I like left-handed stranger, rolls off the mouth, the tongue a little better. It's nice to see the progressive playing hardball. Yeah, indeed. Well, the interesting thing is that I think for a long time, and on Friday, we'll have Ryan Grimm on the program, get his sense of this because he's talking to some of those people there. I think when you get into like a calculus like this, there's always a presumption that the progressives are going to cave because they'll take half a sandwich before they reject, they will take the half a sandwich if if that's all they can get because they want to feed people. But after a while, if you always are going to take that half a sandwich, the people negotiating with you just start offering at a half a sandwich, and then they get you down to a quarter of a sandwich. In this instance, I think this is going to have long-term benefit. We'll also, I don't know. It also occurs to me that, like, let's just imagine a different scenario. 9 months ago, they held up the vote for who the leadership was going to be, ostensibly to get a vote on something that they knew they were going to lose 300 to 120, let's say. And they get reamed for holding that up and holding up the COVID bill. They've set the legislative agenda back. Never mind, January 6th. No one could have known about that, but that would have been also a crap show. Imagine how timid they would be after taking that beating in this instance. Honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, we know going into, as of last summer, when I spoke to AOC on this program, she said Jayapal was starting to sort of like boil down the Progressive Caucus. One leader, not two, going to start to have like a little internal pressure so that they can actually vote as a bloc. So this, I don't think they understood when they would deploy it, but this power was building the ability for them to be cohesive and have and move as a bloc. So this is
and I want to note too that the change in leadership with Jayapal being the sole leader of the Progressive Caucus in the House, I think that also has made a bit of a difference.
Definitely, you have much more room to operate,
and
you can be quicker.
Pocan, I don't think was as willing to play hardball from my read on things.
I think you're right about that too. But chronic pessimist, what do we do when the Progressive Caucus inevitably caves? Are we going to continue to allow the Democratic Party to dictate that we support Amy McGraths in the world, knowing that what their impact within the party is?
If they cave, we'll raise hell, but that hasn't happened yet.
Emma's hardcore backyard wrestling. What up, MR crew? Hey, Sam, can you please be more measured with your clips of Dave Rubin and Meghan McCain? Every time you pause it and restart them, I die a little more inside. Last week, I was just a hair away from being in a catatonic state because of this. Left is best. And what the hell does poggers mean? He didn't even spell it right. It's not pogers. It's poggers. Forget it. Super League hater. I tried watching old Matt's conversation with Michael Tracy and couldn't get past the first 15 minutes. Tracy couldn't stop focusing on his girlfriend and asking why Matt and the crew even brought it up. Is this true? Just as he kept bringing it up endlessly to just air his made-up grievances. I don't know how Matt could tolerate that baby for 2.5 hours.
No.
Is that true?
I did not watch it, but that did not surprise me.
Has someone made a @Michael Tracy's girlfriend Twitter account yet?
Well, don't do it.
Don't do it. I mean, I'm just wondering for research purposes.
Shelby,
I mean, the short answer is because you brought her up in the context of a question about autism, and then Glenn Greenwald also brought her up. But I mean, I guess if that doesn't demystify it, I don't know what will.
Shelby from Phoenix is crystal clear what Sinema wants. She wants to kill the reconciliation bill. That's it. Yeah, I know. I agree. My mom went to get her boosters today, and the Walgreens pharmacy was closed due to technical issues. They called last night to verify her appointment, too. Walgreens has messed up 2 out of 3 appointments for Pfizer shots. Mojave. Kristen Sinema is a Joker agent of chaos. Gupek. Why are the American corporations who work with Sinema left off the hook? It seems like an opportunity to drag them through the mud. Point out the general population and how anti-American these American corporations are. I agree. Because, nobody wants to go there. Rot and the pig. Progressive Bernie and Warren supporters put Biden in the presidency. Then moderates crater the entire party. Progressives will stop voting Dem. I think there's broad awareness. Like I'm reading writers who are traditionally, much more aligned with the moderates and love to hippie punch, saying you can't do this or it's going to be a problem. Jody Foster. Sam, you are my political doula. You always know just the right moment when to tell me to push. Left is best. A Square. Sam, cinema's trajectory is strange and would be comical if she wasn't tragic. Due to balance of power in the Senate. Wonder if Olbermann regrets giving her an early platform. I remember her appearances then before the attention-seeking antics, the wigs and outfits. I think she's setting herself up to be a TV pundit. Maybe a spot in a View type show or be a has-been like Palin.
It's interesting. I think there's a lot of conversation about how we can hold the squad more accountable to the movements that they represent. I haven't seen a lot of that from the Green Party and cinema.
Yeah, I mean, somebody should be looking inwards, right? She started as a Green Party member.
Yep.
Does not speak terribly well for the value
of the Green Party. Yeah, well, I mean, it also
time to do a little better vetting.
Like she's worse than the regular Democrats. Good job. Great theory of change there.
Yeah.
I think this is I think this theory that she's trying to become a celebrity seems to me to be as,
yeah,
you know,
I don't give a F, like
right.
Bloody Mary glass or whatever.
No, she's a mimosa girl.
That was, be clear on what you're talking about there. There was some like Instagram, like her Instagram.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was it?
Yeah, she posted on
yeah, she has an Instagram, like her Instagram account. I think her like avatar for Instagram has her, you know, drinking a like a mimosa or something with a ring that just says F off.
Oh, I guess I remember that now.
Well,
Right.
fuck off. I mean, I don't know why I said F off.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Then she's got the matching frames to the, what's that, a Kangol? No. It's a newsboy hat.
Yeah, the newsy hat.
Newsy hat. Damn. You know what else is awful about her is her style.
It is. That's almost worse than her
She
politics.
has horrible style. And I'm sorry if that's my internalized patriarchy, but her style sucks.
Doodles. If cinema is actively courting a big corporate payoff for her willful obstruction, then wouldn't she be putting herself in danger of federal bribery and graft charges? No. No. I get that. Welcome to our government. Okay. I'm not going to read all of this, but Nina Perez, I live in Palm Beach County, Florida, and I have some Florida-specific thoughts. I disagree with the Miami caller yesterday about the black female not being able to win the state. Andrew Gillum was within a much closer margin than Biden was. And that was during a midterm. I think the domestic progressive policies do really well here, but foreign policies can sink a candidate because of the Cuban and Venezuelan coalitions. There's a large black population in many communities as well, so turnout is really important. I'm honestly not sure if her cop record will help or hurt her here. I do agree, though, that her local game has been extremely weak, and I am hoping to see at least some ads from her sometime soon. I mean, you need to get a good candidate, like someone who's good at running. All right, we got time for one more call. Let's see, scrolling down, I'll take a lot of people have been hanging on for 45 minutes. We'll take one of those. Calling from a 707 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Paul from Northern California.
Paul from Northern California. I think you are the final caller of the day.
Oh, great. Hey, can you hear me okay? Am I sounding all right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Hey, I just wanted to call in about the Epic Times. I'm a mail carrier up here, and I have a few people on my route who subscribe.
Okay.
And can you believe it? And every now and then they send out, they'll send out issues to everybody on my route who's basically on a Republican mailing list. So, and recently, over the past few months, what I've seen is they started to mail out free issues to everybody who's a judge on my route. And I know that because I have the courthouse on my route. I have the county courthouse on my route. And so they're mailing free issues to every single judge in the county, basically.
Wow.
Yeah. And I guess I don't know. I mean, I know they're funded by the Falun Gong or whatever. I don't know really what other funding they have besides that, you know?
Yeah, I don't know who funds them either beyond that. And there's a lot of money there, and money can be effective in that regard. They have really created a massive enterprise. Really interesting story. Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Have a great day, everyone.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
All right, folks, that is all from our calling portion of the day. We're going to try and wrap up on time today. Regarding Mike from Miami's call yesterday, how does idiotic realism about white moderate candidates explain Bill Nelson losing in a wave year in 2018? Good point. Prairie Fire Kowalski, how's the apple harvest? The apple harvest, not great. Not great because too much rain this year. It's okay, but too much rain. And the problem with too much rain, too, I should say, is that for a lot of varieties that ends up being a lot of spraying, because you get some mildew, it starts to hurt the apple, the outside of the apple, the skin protects it from the pests and whatnot. We had a tough fruit tree season because of all the rain this year.
Sam, do you go apple picking?
I go apple picking. I go, I check, I have friends who are apple brokers, see how things are going.
I have never been to an apple. I've only been a few times, but like the apples that are provided there are pretty nasty. I feel like the ones that they allow people to get, they always have, they're just like, they fall on the ground. You pay money.
Don't eat one that falls on the ground. I mean,
I know, but anyway,
all right.
I don't think they have like that. They're not bringing their best for the white people clientele who want to take photos there. That's all I'm saying.
I don't know about that, but all right.
It's my conspiracy theory.
10:15. Why does every CNN interview with a progressive go like this? CNN, why does the Progressive Caucus hate America, want to take the Biden agenda? House Progressive, we've caved on everything and we're willing to cave on more. We only have one more demand, and that is to pass the bill Biden wants. It's clearly not us holding this. I know, it's amazing. Kuka Cinema. Sam, will you wear a romper on the next flex test? Maybe.
No, please.
MSN lies constantly in its water carrying for the national security state. Brave as Robin. Not sure if you already mentioned. Did you see that Saturday Night Live announced that James Austin Johnson is a new cast member? We finally get a funny Trump impersonation. Yeah, it's exciting.
I sent those guys and I texted Brendan too, just because he was here when we did that, which was again I think about that fun half all the time. It made me laugh so hard.
Matthew from Philadelphia. I just called Representative Dwight Evans, Pennsylvania 3rd, Philadelphia, and learned he's willing to vote yes on the bipartisan bill without the reconciliation bill. Called his office 3 times total. The staff member thought he recognized me. So please make your calls to your reps. Majority report should be expressly asking the audience to do this. A calling club, a progressive calling club. That's a good idea. Folks, call your reps and tell them to vote no on the bipartisan bill if there's no reconciliation, which there won't be. Can we put Congress's number in the YouTube description, the switchboard, and in the podcast description, Bradley? Should have thought about that.
Yes.
Between the 101 and the 5, the biggest institutions for science are college universities, which train the professional managerial class, the class of people most responsible for subverting the Bernie movement as figureheads in the media, as well as suburban voters whose instincts are to uphold the hegemony. So crazy. It's like a Ray Bradbury novel or a short story or something. All right. 5 more. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to do that. 5 more. Born Blue, could I please have a shofar for my mom, who would have been 93 today? She passed away at the end of February after a heartbreaking period of COVID, isolation, and mental decline. I'm choosing to remember her compassion and lifelong commitment to social justice. She impacted so many for the better and left a legacy of radical love. Born Blue, this is for your mom. I'm sorry to hear that. Hang in there. Jury report, a wardrobe coordinator. 593 out of 67,000 isn't a revolution. It's a rounding error. I saw a video of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Debbie Dingell yelling at each other about being a better Christian. Honestly, this makes me cringe. We're supposed to have separation of church and state. What kind of argument between elected officials just further inserts mysticism into government? Yes, Romper, please. No. Kid tested, Politburo approved. Brian Kilmeade has been an ardent supporter of our diphtheria vaccination freedoms for some time now. He just hasn't talked or thought about it. Y'all Kada, thanks for the call Discord debate, bro. Call Discord debate?
I don't know.
Chris Burdick. I just wish all these disparate factions of libertarianism could put aside their trivial differences and embrace the one characteristic they all share, pedantry. Chris Peacock, is Emma going to do an ASMR with the water cooler gurgle?
TBD.
All right, two more. Fairchild. Sorry I'm late, but that meeting is talking that cult language fluently. MTG is talking cult language fluidly. And the final I am of the day. They say around here in God and gas country that God put these resources here for us to use them. He built the earth with the intention of us, his children, to use those resources. There's no breaking that. It's baked into the plan. There's no argument there. I've had so many debates with religious, and it always ends up with faith, which isn't debatable. Indeed. Folks, thanks for joining us. Matt, Emma, Bradley, great job today. See you guys. Well, Emma will be here tomorrow. I'll see you Friday. Bye.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught.